#graduan kerja. Direka khusus untuk pengambilan graduan yang menganggur melebihi 12 bulan. Graduan yang menerima tawaran kerja akan menerima insentif gaji selama 2 tahun sebanyak RM500 sebulan sebagai tambahan kepada gaji yang diterima. Kedua, #wanita kerja bertujuan mewujudkan 33,000 peluang pekerjaan setahun untuk wanita berusia di antara 30 hingga 50 tahun yang telah berhenti bekerja selama setahun atau lebih. Wanita yang kembali kerja akan diberi insentif selama 2 tahun sebanyak RM500 sebulan.
Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa, Sharaad and Ibrahim here with you. We're continuing our in-depth look at Budget 2020, which was tabled this afternoon. Now joining us on the line to discuss Malaysians at work, we have Trica, Yeoh, Research Fellow at the think tank Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, or better known as IDEAS. Good evening, Trica. Thank you for joining us today. Now, what stood out for you in Budget 2020? Were you at all surprised or pleased to hear anything in the announcements?
Hi, Melissa, and all of you. Thanks for having me here. I think the thing that really stood out for me, I mean, there were many interesting things, but the key thing was this whole Kerja Malaysia incentive program, right? So talking about incentivizing companies to employ the unemployed who have been out of jobs for a year, and also incentivizing companies to employ women who have not been in work for at least a year. So I think those were the things that really stood out for me. Why it stood out was essentially, I think, this government recognizes that direct cash transfers, that direct cash incentives are popular, and it actually struck me that it reminded me a lot about the kinds of incentives that were given by the Penang state government and also the Selangor state government, and it kind of, I question whether some of these were actually derived from Lim Guan Eng's own personal experience as chief minister in the state, and in a way there are some parallels here where both governments at that time being in opposition, and then now while they're in federal government, both governments being under pressure to deliver while being pressured fiscally in the sense of operating on a rather tight budget. So that was something that stood out for me. I'm not sure whether anyone else caught on that.
Trica, the question of the conceptual soundness of some of these programs, right? The problem of graduate unemployment is a huge one, but is money enough? I mean, are there jobs, and will behavior change either in terms of the employer or the potential employee in accepting the jobs that are available? I mean, is money enough? Is it a skills issue, and is it being addressed?
Yeah, on the one hand, while I felt it was an innovative approach to incentivizing businesses and workers, on the other hand, I did feel like it was rather weak in terms of long-term policy objectives. So, for instance, one wonders how long these cash incentives will last. I mean, is this going to be for a long-term period? Is it for a short-term period? I mean, how many years is it that companies can be expected to be essentially given money into their banking accounts? And in a way, if you think about it, it's a little bit like affirmative action, right, for the unemployed and for the women. But I think your question is right in the sense that if you really want to boost productivity, I wonder what policies are actually available for these firms to really upscale themselves up the value chain, which I don't see to be very present in the budget at the moment. Yes, cash may be sexy, may be exciting for one budget year, for 2 budget years, but beyond that, what you really need is something that will drive companies to want to invest into research and development. I mean, our SMEs in Malaysia, while the government recognizes are really the engine of growth in the country, the SMEs are also the ones that don't feel the need to invest into R&D, and that's why they're being held back from moving up that value chain that we all talk about.
Yeah, Trica, I got something for you. This is a clip talking about minimum wage. Can we just roll that clip for a bit? The clip for Lim Guan Eng talking about minimum wage, 1,200 ringgit. Can we play that clip? Is that clip ready? All right. Okay, while we get that sorted out, Guan Eng was talking about the idea of 1,200 ringgit It's ready? Okay, let's roll that clip right now.
Justru bagi mengimbangi keperluan pekerja dan majikan dengan mengambil kira kenaikan kos sara hidup di bandar-bandar utama. Kerajaan mencarankan supaya gaji minimum ditingkatkan pada kadar RM1,200 sebulan. Hanya di wilayah bandar-bandar utama berkuat kuasa pada tahun 2020.
Tricia, again, RM1,200 minimum wage for big cities. Do you think that it's useful to say that this should be done nationwide and not just the small cities? We're talking about rural poverty might be beneficial in terms of, or might benefit greatly from this minimum wage if it's done everywhere in the country.
Well, I think this has to be backed up by studies, and yes, while it's positive, I mean, RM100 is a small amount, but it's probably positive. In fact, the organization that I'm part of, Ideas, has actually proposed a living wage, which is all the way up to RM2,500. But, back to your question itself, I think there should be studies that back the government's decision to just focus on the major cities and what these major cities are, we don't know yet. And you're right in the sense that even in semi-urban settings in Malaysia, the cost of living isn't that much lower. And if you extend that argument even to states like Sabah and Sarawak, the cost of living in these states are surprisingly high. So whether or not it's urban or rural, I mean, maybe we need to also grow out of this dichotomy of thinking about the country as urban and rural, where the cost of living is so high in the urban areas, which is true, but I think we need to look at what's happening in the semi-urban and semi-rural cities across the country.
Tricia, since you've mentioned Sabah and Sarawak, it does seem that the budget in some ways reflects the new political realities. Do you see enough in the budget to keep the Sabah and Sarawakians happy, feeling less excluded from the mainstream, feeling that their issues are being addressed or compensated for after years of neglect?
I do think that the Pan-Borneo Highway, which every leader, every government seems to talk about in each successive year, that's been mentioned in the budget. I think quite a lot of allocations as well have been mentioned, and of course you can't just look at the allocations that have specifically been mentioned on Sabah and Sarawak, because you need to look at other allocations, say from the Education Ministry, from the Health Ministry, and how much of those are going to be proportioned out to Sabah and Sarawak. And I think it's good to recognize that there has been an increase in terms of education spending as a proportion of the budget as a whole. But I mean, I don't know whether that's going to be enough. I do recognize that the Sarawak state election is coming up in 2021, and so I did think of that when the Minister of Finance was making his speech earlier on.
So Tricia, I want to kind of pivot the conversation to women at work. So there was a lot of incentives announced for returning women to the workforce, the women who have stopped working for more than a year, so within the age bracket of 30 to 50 years old. Do you think, Tricia, that this will allow for a more increased participation in the labour force for women? I believe currently we're at 55% and the target is to be 60%, but there seems to be some doubts whether we can hit this. What do you think?
I think there has been a slew of different incentives announced in the budget. So Women at Work is just one of them that are to encourage the participation of women at work. And I think it's great that the World Bank report that was recently released was also made mention of in the Minister of Finance's speech. And definitely, without a doubt, I mean, I am someone, obviously a working woman, a working mother. I agree that these incentives are important. I also recognize that things like ensuring that there are more childcare centers being built across the country, I would emphasize that these need to be, of quality and of a certain affordability, especially for the lower income groups whose, ability to work is greatly hampered by the lack of such facilities. But I think it shouldn't just come from the government. I think that companies really need to recognize that they can do a lot as well, encouraging, women to perhaps work from home and so on. So I guess my short answer is that yes, I agree with these incentives, and I agree that it's good for women to come back to work, but it needs to be a holistic, ecosystem, and it should not just be one-sided coming from the government all the time. So the employers need to do their fair share as well.
Tricia, always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Now we're going to be back with more on Consider This, so stay tuned.